Hello, I'm Tim Smith with the Adams County Historical Society. This is the Abraham Trostle Farm in the heart of the Second Day's battlefield. And of course, this was the farm that was visited by Alexander Gardner and his crew after the battle, and this is where photographs were recorded of dead horses of the 9th Massachusetts Battery. According to an advertisement in the Gettysburg newspaper in 1854, the house was described as a new house at that time. And you might notice from the photographs that were taken after the battle, there was an addition being placed on the house at that time. Now, we have a nice account of a visitor to the battlefield on July 9th that was printed in the New York Times. And he wrote, "Within 25 yards of the door of a small house, I counted 15 dead horses, some with their entrails exposed in the most disgusting manner. All of them were swollen and lying upon their sides and backs, and a most horrible odor proceeded from them, which the winds carried to a great distance. The lady of the house, who had just taken possession of it again, was talking to someone about having them buried." And of course, the lady is Catherine Trosel. She was married to Abraham Trosel. They had 9 children at the time of the Civil War. The farm was actually owned by Abraham's father, Peter Trosel. And, you know, Abraham was not the most upstanding of Gettysburg citizens. From notices in the newspaper and from some of our criminal court records, he had trouble with the law. In an 1870 filing, he was listed as a habitual drunkard. And there's some question as to whether he was actually here and present at the time of the battle. Now, you might know that after the battle, there were horses everywhere. And when the Adams County Historical Society did the book on the farms at Gettysburg, I wanted to have something about the horses. Years ago, one of my colleagues and associates, a licensed battlefield guide, found a document at the National Archives in Washington, D.C. And it was the Union Army's quartermaster asking for 5,000 horses, or actually, I'm sorry, 2,500 horses to replace the horses that the Northern Army had lost during the Gettysburg campaign. Now, people have taken that number, 2,500 by the Northern Army, and then added 2,500 for the Southern Army, and come up with the idea that about 5,000 horses were lost during the Gettysburg campaign. So that's the march from Virginia to the battlefield and the march back. And you can bet that most of those horses are lost on the march in the hot June and July sun. But a lot of people have used that about the battlefield. From my reading of the accounts of the horses that were killed in the fighting, there are probably hundreds, maybe as many as 1,000 horses that were killed in the immediate vicinity of the battlefield. No one counted. So if you hear estimates of 5,000 or 10,000 that people throw out there, there's just nothing to base that on. Now, one thing is for sure, the horses were a huge problem. After the battle, families took wounded soldiers in and they helped to bury the dead, and soldiers remained behind to help bury the massive amount of dead. And it wasn't until a couple weeks after the battle they even decided what they should do with a massive amount of horse carcasses. It was July, and the horses were causing a huge problem. And the smell and the odor from the horses, and the disease was spreading, and with all the contaminated wells, and so they decided to burn the horses. At first they tried burying them, but you know how big of a hole you got to dig to bury a horse. So they burned the horses, they put them in huge piles, and they lit them on fire. And I was able to find 2 references to visitors and to burning horses. And one of them comes from Benson Lossing, who toured the battlefield on July 11th, 1863. He actually says, the bodies of slain soldiers were buried, but those of the horses, some untouched, and some consuming by fire, were scattered thickly over the fields. During our ride within the Union lines, we saw the remains of not less than 200 of these noble brutes, many of them on fire, the smoke of which, with the effluvium of decomposition everywhere, filled the whole region of Gettysburg with an unpleasant odor. And we can only imagine what that was like. I do, or at least I did for almost 30 years, hundreds of tours of the battlefield with 8th graders every year. And of course, 8th graders, they want to talk about the dead horses. And two things that I would always tell them is that every horse had a name. And of course, we shouldn't forget, how do you create a pile of horses to light on fire? Live horses had to drag their dead buddies into the pile. If you like the historical content that we put on our YouTube channel, please subscribe.